Generation Alpha versus Generation Z. Not as in we're enemies. I want to be buddies, of course, with all folks of all ages. But I've been thinking about what the differences are and how our upbringings were. So we're gonna talk about that today. So first off, Gen Z. I've heard another name for it is digital natives. I got through all the way up till the end of the 8th grade before I had my first cell phone. But I'm also at the higher end of Gen Z. I think, just a year from being considered a millennial. So for the most part, I grew up without a phone. Limited access to the internet. We had video games. Like PlayStation 2 for the largest amount of time. I think we got the PlayStation 3 before I had my first phone. But even back then, even if you had a phone, and this goes with gaming consoles too, they weren't as addictive. You were more inclined to go hang out with your friends or make new friends. Boredom is a powerful tool. It's looked at as a bad thing, but I was talking to my older brother the other day. I was talking to him last night too, but this would have been maybe a couple months ago. He said this. He said, I have the best ideas when I'm bored. But aside from that, it's a good motivator. When I moved out here, I've pretty much stopped playing video games entirely. I've always been more into online competitive gaming, but you can't really do that out here. So every once in a while, I'll just play some Vermintide offline. Even that game, it's not the same if you're not playing online. Play that on my PS4 sometimes, but it doesn't stay entertaining for long. This is Meryl, by the way. I can maybe play, I don't know, like an hour, 2 hours a week max of video games. But another thing I seem to avoid that to an extent I've avoided it, but it does I notice it entraps many of my peers. The social media thing. I do have a bad habit of spending too much time on Reddit, and I've been reanalyzing that because if everyone's anonymous, for all you know, it could just be you're just reading input from bots. And there's a lot of echo chamber aspects to that app. But I do enjoy reading. I don't really get a kick out of like looking at images or little videos. So what I really need to do is get back into reading books. I have Libby. I really recommend that app. Can't recommend it enough. Where a physical book is cool and all, but I usually have one hand occupied, and well, it's more like I think the biggest gripe against books for me is like laying down and reading a book is just kind of uncomfortable to me. But I think the scary thing about Gen Alpha, speaking of reading, is I've heard that reading comprehension is pretty low compared to people coming up before them. Now, why is that? I don't know. I haven't looked into it much. I don't even know what the actual numbers are. Just heard it through the grapevine. But, until you're willing to hook up your brain to a machine, if you learn how to read, that's the fastest way to download information. Really, for me, nothing else. I think trying to learn something watching a video, it kind of depends what it is. If it's more in the physical realm, 3D, sure, visual is better for me. I think I learn faster when it's something like that, but when it comes to ideas, abstract ideas, reading, I just pick stuff up way faster. So if people are losing the ability to read, that's pretty bad. Now, a lot of Gen Z did grow up with phones from a very young age, but like I said, they weren't as addictive. I think they're only getting more addictive as they gather more data on what holds your attention. Of course they're gonna get more addictive. So there's that. I'm sure there's Gen Zers younger than me whose parents didn't give them a phone in their childhood, which I agree with. I still haven't figured out at what age I want my daughter to have a phone. But it won't be for a while. So I think here's another thing. I think people know how damaging they are now. So I think there's the possibility that uh, Gen Alpha might actually be more likely to have a phoneless childhood. Hindsight is 2020. But it really depends on if people having kids now actually pay attention to the downsides of what that whole thing has done. I think it has contributed to loneliness, what they call the loneliness epidemic. I think it's possible that's contributed to the falling reading comprehension rates. Guys, it's like hard. It's hard for these kids to pay attention to a book when they have all this all this really stimulating entertainment. And now we're gonna go into this. So are kids coming up, are they softer? Well, if you're inside cooped up on a phone and you're not going outside, because the motivation to go outside when I was a kid was boredom. And if it weren't for that, I'm sure I would have stayed inside more. And then eventually you meet other kids and they're out because they're bored. So what I'm hoping for is that enough people, and I was blessed in the fact that I didn't live in there's certain environments that aren't conducive to going outside and hanging out with other kids. If you live somewhere that isn't walkable and it's dangerous because of cars, and there's no parks or what they call third spaces, which is a space that people can come together and not spend money and just hang out, which is what kids need. Malls are one, which are becoming a thing of the past. We didn't have a mall, but we had very low traffic. I wouldn't call it a walkable neighborhood, but it was because there weren't really any cars. And there weren't really any roads, except the main road going through town where cars would go over, say, 30, 35 miles per hour. And then dirt roads, shitty roads a lot of times cars wouldn't go past like 5, 10 miles per hour on my road. And on top of that, we had we were bordering a national forest, so that's like the ultimate third space for kids, in my opinion. Sure, you still had hazards like rattlesnakes and bobcats and such, but there were never any incidents. I remember one time I went up and I was just by myself, and I was just walking on one of the trails and I heard like the bushes move. I still don't know what it was. It could have been a bobcat. Could have been a kitty cat, a domestic cat like Meryl. But I ran down that mountain so fast, and I kind of stopped going up by myself after that. What I'm hopeful for is that more people will be okay with allowing their kids to be bored. If only a few people do it and their kids are bored, I'm gonna go outside, but all the other kids are inside, like on their tablets or whatever. It's not, they're not gonna have that same childhood that I did and a lot of the millennials and former generations had. So back to the toughness thing. If you're isolated from other kids coming up, you're never gonna have, unless you go into sports, and that's a really good one too. But not all parents can afford that. Not all parents have time for that. That's only really available to kids that are fortunate enough to have the support system in place to be able to participate. So, yeah, have you ever noticed how when there's like a bouncy house or a trampoline, it always eventually leads to kids fighting, like play fighting, not sometimes real, sometimes it does get real. But that stuff really toughens you up, and I can vouch for it because I mean, there's a couple examples, but the one I like to go to a lot is I have a friend that we used to hang out, like he was part of the group, and I'd say most of the time spent when we got a trampoline was spent wrestling, and like you'd still wrestle and stuff indoors, but like it would like make your moms mad and stuff, so but he's a high performing wrestler now at a very high level, and I think that helped. I'm not saying like if it weren't for that he wouldn't be, but I think it definitely helped. And he just from the get-go was built like a wrestler, a very stocky and athletic guy. But I remember us going. I don't remember whose birthday it was. I don't think it was his birthday, but he was there, and we all went to this like big trampoline indoor park. And we got into like fights, like more, yeah, not like really real, but like wrestling, body slamming, not really throwing punches or trying to scratch each other's eyeballs out kind of thing, with a group of kids that were much older than us. And I remember us doing pretty good. And I think that's another example of how this stuff toughens you up. And these particular kids, they were from a community that was less conducive to going out, hanging out with your friends, walking around, meeting kids. It was more car centric, more heavily populated, and I think that contributed to their lack of physical prowess. Um, but this video is about the differences. And it's an ongoing thing, but I do hope that more people pay attention to what happened to my generation and take account of that, and look into raising this next generation differently because of that. Uh, uh, the thing that I'm seeing though, that's concerning is it seems like a lot of this next generation coming up, and I'm guilty of this too, but uh I'm working on it, and it's helicopter parenting. It's being too concerned for the safety of your child. But what you have to realize about that is by not allowing them to develop in that regard, you're endangering them in the long term. You might be keeping them safer in the short term, but in the long term, if you don't allow them to like play fight, cats do this. I see these two, they play fight. It's nothing, it's not like they have beef with each other. It's just that they're learning how to defend themselves, and they enjoy it. And kids enjoy it too. It's really fun. Uh, so I would consider allowing them to do that. And if you have multiple kids, So, a story from a friend of mine, and I have stories like this too, but yeah, kind of like the one I told you about with the indoor gym. This was like relatives. My brother was there too, so there's that. But when they go to like a place with other kids and like you're fighting and maybe you team up with your brother or sister and that forms a bond, and so uh that forms a bond, and that's good stuff too. You want your kids to be close. But a friend of mine was telling a story where they went to a birthday party, there was a bounce house, and they were just teaming up, just like fighting kids. Like, I made the joke like it was like Rush Hour. They were like the two guys from Rush Hour. And, yeah, that's kind of a cool factor about it too. Again, it's an ongoing process. I get a closer lens on it because I'm like around other kids from Gen Alpha, but it's mostly toddlers for now. What I'm seeing is they're very uh, they have conflict. They're like, fighting over toys and stuff, but what I do usually is I let the fight happen, and then, you know, uh, if my daughter wins the fight, I usually encourage her to, like, oh, that other kid was playing with that toy first, you should give it back. But it's not like play fighting, it's not just fighting for the purpose of fighting, for play fighting. It's, oh, we're fighting over this thing, which gets pretty real sometimes. So, and she's a little girl. Girls aren't really into wrestling and stuff, but I think it's still beneficial to them, and I don't know. We'll see. I see little boys and stuff too, and they don't really seem to be into that. But the environments I'm in, like the library, the playground, those were never really the areas where we would like play fight. So it'll be interesting to see how kids act when you like go to a birthday party and there's a bounce house. I wonder if anyone has input on that. Like, have you been to a birthday party recently with a bounce house? Do your neighbors like have a trampoline? And what are the kids doing? Are they just like bouncing or are they fighting? Because that just always seemed to be the most fun thing to do. And I actually think it's safer. If you have multiple kids in a bounce house or a trampoline and they're all just jumping around, you're not really supposed to do that. If you look at the trampoline instructions, it's like one person at a time. It's like, fuck that. No one's gonna listen to that. That's like, we're all just gonna take turns bouncing. But I think if you're all like grounded and wrestling and just like throwing each other around, no one's really gonna get hurt unless like punches start being thrown. And even then, they're kids, so they can't really generate enough force to actually really injure each other for the most part. But if you're like bouncing around with a bunch of other kids and you land on someone else's foot, like that is gonna mess you up. I had an injury that way. Yeah, so if you see your kids fighting and you're like, oh, just jump, play fighting, you're actually endangering them more, in my opinion, to injury. And again, it goes back to the long term thing. If they don't get comfortable with physicality, if they get into a fight in their adult life, they're just going to be completely unprepared. Not even adult, like if they get into a fight in high school, just completely unprepared. Like if you've never had any contact at all, that's dangerous. That's pretty much it. Those are like the two big ones that are concerning to me. Um, uh, yeah, fighting and reading comprehension. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.